They don't lie down and pathetically say, oh, we don't understand it, so God did it. Scientists actually work on the problem. They set to work, they roll up their sleeves, and they work on the problem. One day, physics will answer those deep questions. And even if it doesn't, even if physics doesn't answer those questions, what on earth makes you think that religion can? You hold the hand of somebody who's dying. It's nice for them to think that they're going to a better place. Of course it's comforting. That doesn't make it true. You cannot argue for some truth about the universe.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to participate in this debate on one of life's most important questions. Does the universe have a purpose? And in today's debate, we on the affirmative side are going to defend two main contentions. First, that if God does not exist, then the universe has no purpose. And secondly, if God does exist, then the universe does have a purpose. Let me say a word in defense of each of those contentions. First, if God does not exist, then both man and the universe are inevitably doomed to death. Man, like all biological organisms, must die. And the universe, too, faces a death of its own. Astronomers tell us that the universe is expanding, and as it does so, it grows colder and colder as its energy is used up. Eventually, all the stars will burn out, and all matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There will be no light, there will be no heat, there will be no life, just the corpses of dead stars and galaxies ever expanding into the endless darkness and the cold recesses of space, a universe in ruins. This is not science fiction. As unimaginable as it may sound, barring divine intervention, this will happen. There is no escape. There is no hope. On atheism, there is no immortality beyond the grave. And what's the consequence of this? Well, as many atheist philosophers from Nietzsche to Russell to Sartre have recognized, it means that life itself is absurd. It means that life is without objective purpose. As Richard Dawkins has put it, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no good, no evil, nothing but pitiless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. Thus, if God does not exist, then life and the universe are without purpose. But if atheism fails to provide a purpose for life and the universe, what about biblical theism? According to the biblical worldview, God does exist and man's life does not end at the grave. The purpose of life is to be found in a personal relationship with a holy and loving God. As the Westminster Catechism asks, what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Biblical theism thus provides the two conditions necessary for an objectively purposeful life: God and immortality. And because of this, we can live consistently and purposefully within the framework of such a worldview. And thus, biblical theism succeeds precisely where atheism breaks down. Now, I'd be the first to say that none of this proves that God exists. But in today's debate, we've been asked to discuss not whether God exists, but whether the universe has a purpose. And the answer to that question is, it all depends. If God does not exist, then the universe has no purpose. If God does exist, then the universe has a purpose. On this question, there need be no dispute between the theist and the atheist. I think we can all agree with those two contentions as I've stated them. Now, if our colleagues on the other side want to go beyond this merely conditional statement and claim that the universe in fact has no purpose, then they must prove that the antecedent of that conditional is true. That is to say, they must show that God does not exist. So what arguments did Professor Ridley give to show that God does not exist? Well, I basically heard only one, namely the problem of evil. This is not the best of all possible worlds. Well, certainly all of us need to face the problem of evil, and any account of evil must begin with this question: what is evil? I maintain that evil is a departure from the way things ought to be. I can think of no more reasonable definition of evil that captures our shared intuitions. But if we agree that there is evil in the world, and that evil is a departure from the way things ought to be, then we must also agree that there is a way things ought to be. But if there is a way things ought to be, then there must be some transcendent design plan or purpose that determines how things ought to be. And so there must be some transcendent being, a creator in fact, whose will is the basis for how things ought to be. And hence evil is actually evidence that God does exist. If atheists are right and God does not exist, then there is no design plan, hence no way things ought to be, hence no departure from the way things ought to be, and hence no evil. But does anyone here really want to claim that evil does not exist? So I don't think we've heard any good reason to think that God does not exist. Indeed, the theist is not committed to Leibniz's claim that this is the best of all possible worlds. Now, time doesn't permit me to develop in my opening statement a case for theism. Let me simply list the arguments which I have defended in my published work. Number one, God is the best explanation for why anything exists rather than nothing. 2, God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. 3, God is the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the initial conditions of the universe for intelligent life. 4, God is the best explanation for the existence of objective moral values and duties in the world, including evil. And 5, the very possibility of God's existence entails that God exists. If you're interested in a detailed discussion of these arguments,
time is out, I'm sorry.
See my book, Reasonable Faith.
Thank you very much.
Isn't it easier to believe there is nothing when there is no evidence? Why should atheists have to prove there is no God when the person claiming a God exists has not proven it? The burden of proof belongs to the person making the supernatural claim. Craig says, without God, life has no purpose. That sounds emotional, but it proves nothing. The universe ending one day does not magically make Christianity true. Science tells us stars burn out, matter changes, and life is temporary. That is reality, not evidence for heaven. Then he uses evil as evidence for God, which is a weak move. If a perfect, loving, all-powerful God exists, then cancer, child suffering, disasters, and pointless pain become a massive problem for Christianity. Even Ecclesiastes says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." So the Bible itself wrestles with meaning. Craig has not proven God. He has shown that humans are afraid of a universe that does not promise them an ending they like.
My colleague Peter Atkins, whose works I recommend to you, I think that it's high time that a scientist won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and Peter Atkins would be my nominee for that. He was once invited to give a lecture in Windsor Castle, which, as you know, is one of the homes of the British monarch. And at the end of his lecture, Prince Philip said, "You scientists are awfully good at answering the how questions, but what about the why question?" And Peter Atkins said, "Sir, the why question is just a silly question." We humans are obsessed with purpose. It seems perfectly natural when we're presented with an object to say, what's it for? It starts in childhood. The psychologist Deborah Kellerman has investigated this very interestingly with children, offering them a question like, why do you think these rocks are pointy? Is it because of some geological explanation, geological cause, or is it so that animals could scratch on them when they get itchy? And below a certain age, I think it's about 6, most children answer with the teleological answer with the purpose question. Yes, they're pointy so that animals can scratch on them when they get itchy. Children then mostly grow out of that purposive way of looking at the world, but not apparently everybody. In medieval times, I've got to try to work this. Who's good with iPads? I'm trying to get... Oh, here we are. Okay. In medieval times, divines would look at living things and see purpose for human benefit in them. In the 19th century, the Reverend William Paley thought that the louse was an indispensable incentive to cleanliness. Savage beasts, according to an Elizabethan bishop, fostered human courage, and provided useful training for war. Horseflies, for an 18th century writer, were created so that men should exercise their wits and industry to guard themselves against them. Lobsters were given hard shells so that before eating them we could benefit from the improving exercise of cracking their claws. Another medieval writer thought that weeds were there to benefit us. It's so good for our spirit to have to work hard pulling them up. Now, it's not difficult to see that such people would also have found purpose in the physical world, in mountains. What's the purpose of a mountain? What's the purpose of a stream? We humans love to see purpose everywhere. And it's one of the great achievements of science, I think especially Darwin, but other scientists as well, to show that the impulse that we have to see purpose in anything doesn't work. And he did it not with the easy things like mountains. I mean, essentially any fool could see that mountains don't have a purpose. He did it with living things. And living things on the face of it have purpose written all over them. We look at a bird's wing, an engineer looks at a bird's wing, an albatross wing, say, and sees that it's perfectly designed for the particular way of flying that albatrosses have. Swifts have a different way. You look at an eye, you look at a heart, you look at a kidney. Everything looks designed. The Reverend William Paley himself, who was one of the earliest, one of the most coherent, I should say, advocates of this point of view, elevated the living world as being the most important place where you can find evidence for, as he thought, a deity. Don't look at astronomy, he said, look at living things. But what Darwin did was to show that even the worst case, even the most difficult case, that's the living case, has a perfectly rational, simple explanation. You do not need to resort to the idea of a designer. That was an astonishing intellectual achievement. Something as complicated as an eye, something as complicated as a heart, even a brain. Who would have thought that by the laws of physics, unaided, unviolated, just filtered through this brilliant process of natural selection, evolution by natural selection, that the blind laws of physics could produce the illusion of design as complicated and as persuasive as we see in the living world? Well, our colleagues on the other side have probably mostly given up on the living world. That was their happy hunting ground. That was the best place for them to operate, as Paley recognized. So they've been forced back now into places like the origin of the cosmos, the origin of the universe. And they like to point to the origin of the universe and say, well, science can't explain the Big Bang, or science can't explain where the laws of physics come from. Physicists are working on that. That's what scientists do. They don't lie down and pathetically say, oh, we don't understand it, so God did it. Scientists actually work on the problem. They set to work, they roll up their sleeves, and they work on the problem. One day, physics will answer those deep questions. And even if it doesn't, even if physics doesn't answer those questions, what on earth makes you think that religion can? Thank you very much.
Dawkins is exposing one of religion's biggest weaknesses. It mistakes human imagination for evidence. People once said animals, weeds, mountains, and even parasites existed for human purpose. That was not wisdom. That was ignorance dressed up as theology. Darwin broke that argument. Natural selection explains why life looks designed without needing a designer. Eyes, wings, hearts, and brains did not appear fully formed. They developed through small inherited changes across huge amounts of time. The fossil record, genetics, antibiotic resistance, and observed changes in species all support evolution. So when Christianity points at complexity and says, God did it, that is not proof. That is a shortcut. Science has evidence, testing, and correction. Religion has ancient claims, fear, and authority. If the religious answer is true, then prove it. Do not point at a mystery and pretend the mystery is evidence for your God.
As I look at my notes for the debate this afternoon, I think there's wide agreement among us on the two contentions that we said we would defend. First, that if God does not exist, then there is no purpose for the universe, and our colleagues seem to agree with that. Secondly, on the other hand, if the God of biblical theism does exist, then clearly there is a purpose for universe and for life, and that's found in relationship with God. The question then is, have the two sides presented arguments and evidence for or against the existence of God? Now, so far as I can see, all I've heard from the atheist side is the argument from evil, which I answered and has yet to be replied to. We heard an argument from evolutionary development, but that obviously doesn't prove that God is not the supervisor who created life through evolution. That doesn't in any way prove atheism. I haven't seen any other argument for atheism in tonight's debate. So while we can agree that if God does not exist, life has no purpose, we've not heard any good or compelling evidence for the antecedent of that conditional, that God does not exist. By contrast, I think we've heard 10 arguments that I list for the existence of God. The argument from why anything exists rather than nothing, the argument from the beginning of the universe, the argument from the fine-tuning of the universe for life, the argument from objective moral values, the argument from the possibility of God's existence, David Wolpe's argument from the comprehensibility of the universe, number 8, the argument from the law-like structure of the universe, number 9, Doug Guyvet's argument from the nature of existential choice, and finally, number 10, the very nature of human beings as capable of asking questions of purpose. All of these, I think, constitute a powerful cumulative case for thinking that there is a transcendent creator and designer of the universe who is the locus of absolute moral goodness, and in relationship with whom we can find the purpose and meaning of the universe. I think the most reprehensible position represented in tonight's debate is Richard Dawkins' claim that why questions are just silly. These are the deepest existential questions that human beings can ask, and to refuse to ask such why questions is to reduce human beings to mere animals, which is, of course, exactly what Professor Dawkins believes. We're just animated chunks of matter in motion. Love, questions of meaning, and so forth are all ultimately just spin-offs of the blind bioevolutionary process. But if God exists, then clearly these are meaningful questions. These are vital questions for the nature of human existence and destiny. The tragedy would be that if God does exist and you miss his purpose for your life because you think these are silly questions and therefore don't need to think about them, would be the ultimate tragedy.
Craig keeps trying to turn fear into proof. He says life has no purpose without God, then acts like that makes Christianity true. That is emotion, not evidence. Atheists do not lack love, meaning, or morality. Human brains evolve to feel attachment, protect family, cooperate, and build communities. We see this in biology, psychology, and even animal behavior. Purpose can come from people, not from a supernatural ruler. And his 10 arguments still do not prove the Bible, Jesus rising from the dead, heaven, hell, or Christianity. Pointing at the universe and saying, God explains it, is not proof. It is a claim looking for evidence.
There has been a major shift in the last 2 speeches in this debate. Did you see what it was? We've argued tonight, first of all, that if God does not exist, then the universe has no purpose. Our atheist colleagues admit that. But now what they've been claiming is, but look, we can construct a purpose for our lives, in Richard Dawkins' words. Or in Michael Shermer's words, we can develop ways to make us feel better, feeling like we have a purpose. Now, you see, this just is to say that we can pretend that the universe exists for some purpose. And this is just make-believe. This is the subjective illusion of purpose. But there is, on this view, no objective purpose for the universe. And we, of course, would never deny that you can't develop subjective purposes for your life. The point is, on atheism, they're all illusory. And that's why I agree with Richard Dawkins when he said, at bottom, this is an emotional question rather than a rational one. I wish I had had the courage to say that. I'm convinced that people adopt atheism, at least tonight, primarily for emotional rather than rational purposes. The rational arguments tonight all have supported theism. But you cannot live as though your life were purposeless and meaningless. And therefore you adopt subjective illusions of purpose to make your life livable. And that's why I think atheism is not only irrational, it is profoundly unlivable. You cannot live consistently and purposefully within the context of an atheistic worldview.
Thank you. I have to correct my own colleague, Richard Dawkins. Richard, jealousy does have a color. It's green. Shakespeare figured that out. And there's a reason for that, a good evolutionary reason. Okay, gentlemen, and Michio, and technically you're right, we can't prove or disprove that there's a God, but please understand, Michio, these guys argue that you can prove it through science and empirical tests and reason and so on. We're arguing that they haven't done so from a scientific perspective. That's the only reason we deal with it on that level. Professor Craig, we don't pretend to have purpose when we love our spouses and have meaningful work and career and do things for other people. If we were pretending, they would know. Your spouse would know if you're faking it. You actually have to believe it. It's real purpose. The real purpose we have, to finish where I began, is that this long lineal chain, 3.5 billion years of life on Earth without a single missed generation, and here we are. We have inherited the mantle of life's caretaker on Earth, the only home we've ever known. The realization that we exist together for a narrow slice of time in a limited little parsec of space elevates us all to a higher plane of humanity Time out.
and humility.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. David.
Four things I did not say. One, I never said scientists don't have poetry and love and so on. I said they're not susceptible to the scientific method. That's very different. Second, I did not say that my opponents were pathetically lazy. Third, I did not say they were childish. And that's why, fourth, I did not say that good manners in argument are only on our side and not on their side. But here's one thing that I did say. I've sat at the bedside of scores of people who are dying. I've held their hands. I have faced death several times myself through illness. I know what it is to understand that you are ending your life in this world. And I know what it is to ask yourself the question, is this the only world, or is the universe something greater and something deeper? We don't claim we can prove God. We don't claim we can prove purpose. We do claim that our intuition of purpose is not empty, it's not foolish, it's not childish, and it's not stupid. That when I hold the hand of someone who's dying, that I really do believe that I usher them into another mode of being. People have believed that since the beginning of time, and the fact that not everyone believes it today doesn't mean it is not true. After all, though he slay me, still will I believe in him. Thank you.
Here is the move religion keeps making. When evidence runs out, it appeals to fear, death, and emotion. People have always believed this is not proof. People also believed the sun moved around the earth, disease came from curses, and storms were acts of angry gods. Age does not make a claim true. Saying purpose must come from God also fails. A parent loving a child, a doctor helping a patient, or a person building a better life is not make-believe. That purpose is real because it shapes choices, relationships, and actions. Christianity wants to own meaning, but it has not proven heaven, hell, resurrection, or a divine plan. Feeling comfort at a deathbed may be powerful, but comfort is not evidence. Religion may calm fear, but calming fear does not make the story true.
When you hold the hand of somebody who's dying, it's nice for them to think that they're going to a better place. Of course it's comforting. That doesn't make it true. You cannot argue for some truth about the universe by saying that it would be nice if it were true. Of course, there is mystery. There is enormous mystery in the universe, and that's what science is working on. To respond to that mystery by saying God did it, to respond to that mystery by saying, oh, there's just some divine designer who figured it all out, that is lazy. It doesn't answer the question. Darwin provided us with the role model for how you approach that kind of thing. He took the really hard case, which is life. He took the case where it seemed obvious to everybody that it had to have a purpose, that it had to be designed. He showed for the hard case that it could be done. That's what science is working on. The mystery, when it is solved, will be solved by scientists who will use the Darwinian method. That's to say, they will explain in a bottom-up way how it is not just that life came about, and we know that, we understand that now, but also how it is that the universe came about. That is the challenge of science. That is what science is going to rise to. We shall not resort to lazy, second-rate explanations that just lie down under the problem and say, God did it.
Time out. Wow. Un aplauso, un gran aplauso para los seis maestros. Please, if you could stand up, un aplauso de todos para ustedes.
Well, I have to say that I'm surprised by what Michio Kaku said at the very beginning in ascribing to our team 100% certainty in what we have argued. I don't think any of us claimed to have 100% certainty, and in fact, I would say that all of the arguments we presented for the existence of God were probability arguments. And they are arguments to the effect that the existence of God is so likely that it is the way we ought to bet with our lives if we should have purpose. That is not 100% certainty. But I did get the sense of 100% certainty that science is the only source of knowledge, according to this side over here. And Michio Kaku, maybe that's your view too, I don't know, because you did say that the God question is undecidable. How undecidable? Well, presumably because you can't prove that God exists or even show his probability if you have science only to go with. But of course, there are many things we know, including that God may well exist because of other evidence without depending exclusively on science. Richard Dawkins has accused us of making an emotional argument. But I believe that his presentation is especially emotional. He has not argued that God does not exist. Thank you. He has not shown that any of the arguments we presented here today are fallacious. Rather, he has simply dismissed the idea of God as pathetic.
Time out, I'm sorry.
That's emotional. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow. Ahora viene el round 13. En el round 13, algunos de nuestros speakers, would you like to join us? If you want to say something, it's perfect. Van a bajar con mucho cuidado, very carefully, y van a tener un minuto. A Mira Axel, porque no tuvo mucho tiempo de dialogar con Jerome Friedman, le vamos a arreglar 1 minuto y medio. ¿Estamos de acuerdo? Okay, Jerome Friedman, Amir, you will have 1 minute and a half.
Thank you.
I promise you have it.
Can you hear
Todos
me?
los demás van a tener 1 minuto. Please, if you want to get in, pasen. Todos 1 minuto y medio, va. Pasen. Henry. Okay, if you want, you can wait there. But, Amir, 1 second, please. First of all, our Nobel Prize will begin with 1 minute and a half. Please, from this position. Jerome Friedman, su punto de vista.
This has been a fascinating debate, and what it really is the contrast between knowledge attained by observation and knowledge obtained by revelation. And they're quite different. Knowledge obtained by observation is testable, and it's always being tested, and you can actually put numerical probabilities on it. Knowledge obtained by revelation is not testable, and you cannot really assign a sensible probability to it. And that is really the source of the great controversy. Now, the question of the purpose of the universe is the following. You know, if you say, what is purpose? Purpose is the reason for doing something, or the reason for existing. Now, this implies that the universe has to have a reasoning creator. Personally, I do not feel that I see enough evidence to support that point of view. That's my own personal feeling from listening to all the arguments and observing what's around me. Now, it's true that we do not understand things completely in science. We probably never will. There are mysteries that will always elude us because there are things we cannot measure. We can't go outside the observable universe. We can't go before the Big Bang. We cannot approach those regions. So we have to assume that we will be ignorant about certain things. Now the question is whether you have to have a narrative to fill in that mystery.
Time out, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Un aplauso, por favor, para John Feynman. Amir Axel, it's your turn.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andres. I'm very delighted to see that both sides here embrace physics as the answer for everything, and the two physicists here had little to speak. They had spoke the least. But I would like to say one thing. The way to approach the argument is we're a little bit premature because, as Professor Kaku said, we're not yet at the final theory. We don't know everything yet. And what I want to do here is to give you an idea of where the final theory is going. Professor Kaku's approach of string theory is one direction. There are other directions called supersymmetry, and we have something called the standard model, which is 3 formulas in his book, actually. They all have to do with one principle, and that's symmetry. We don't understand symmetry, and we don't know why it's there. But we're getting close to understanding symmetry. Now, in the last 43 seconds I have, I want to give you one example of symmetry. The electron is a very interesting thing. It goes around once, and it reverses itself. So it has to go around twice in order to start where it began, to get back to where it began. You can try it at home. You think there's nothing in the world that does that. I go around a circle, I come back where I started, but I can't do it. There, try it at home. One last thing. There is a symmetry called SU5, which I can't explain to you, but it was invented by Sheldon Glashow at Boston University and another physicist. And if it's true, the universe will go away regardless of whether it's expanding and whether the stars are dying. Thank you very much.
Here is the real difference. Science admits what it does not know. Religion pretends mystery is proof. Observation can be tested. Evidence can be checked. Scientific claims can be corrected when new facts appear. Revelation does not work that way. You cannot test heaven. You cannot measure hell. You cannot verify that a voice, a vision, or an ancient text came from God. So when religion says, science has not explained everything, that still does not help Christianity. An unanswered question is not evidence for Jesus. It is only an unanswered question. The honest answer is simple. We do not know everything yet. But not knowing is better than inventing a supernatural story and demanding everyone treat it like truth. Religion fills the gap. Science investigates the gap. That is why science keeps moving forward while religion keeps defending old claims.
I've never been to a conference like this before. Most of the professional conferences at which I speak are philosophy conferences. So this is my initiation to this sort of IT subculture, information technology. And I would just urge you folks not to allow the IT community to become infected with the sort of self-defeating scientism and anti-religious bigotry that has characterized, for example, Richard Dawkins' talk yesterday. You need to realize that outside of this sphere, the most brilliant philosophers and many scientists in the world today are outspoken theists, and that this is a rational and defensible point of view.
Thank you very much. 30 seconds, please. Last remark. Mark.
I don't like hearing the word bigotry of our position. We've searched for purpose in the large structures of space. We've searched for it in the subatomic particles. We've searched for it in natural history. We've searched for it in bodies. We've searched for it in genes. We haven't found it. Yes, it might be round the corner, but it doesn't seem very likely now. We found pattern. We haven't found purpose. That's telling us something. It's a unicorn.
Thank you. David.
I'm not so certain. I want you to know I have tremendous respect for the three adversaries here. I've read many of their books, of all three of them, and I think they have a great deal to say that's very important. It's not as though I come here assuming I have all the answers. I doubt all the time. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, a great rabbi, said he was a moon man. His faith waxed and waned. And I feel sometimes the same way. But with all your doubts, at a certain point, you have to make a commitment with your life. And so I follow the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, I fail every day, but to victory I am born.
Time. Thank you very much. Matt, Michael, or Richard, whoever you want.
All right. Okay, so first of all, we're not saying that the universe has, that we have no purpose. We are the purpose givers. We are the humble ones in that sense. So, and it comes from the fact that this is what we do. We look for love, career, work, meaningful work, helping other people, and transcendence. That's where it comes from. We are the purpose makers. And I'll leave you with a purpose you can have. Always seek purpose with somebody else's purpose in mind, and never seek purpose in trying to take somebody else's purpose away. It's a very simple principle.
Okay. Please, Douglas.
Well, first of all, I simply want to thank our moderator and the entire conference organizers team for including a handful of theists in the program for this conference. I'm serious about that, and I hope that will continue. I think it's a very worthwhile discussion we've had. Let me finish, thank you, with a quote by C.S. Lewis, a great Christian thinker, who said, "If I find in myself a desire which nothing in this world can satisfy, then probably I was made for another world." Thank you.
Time. Richard Dawkins, the last remark.
Simplicity is that which is easy to understand. Complexity is that which is difficult. We as scientists are engaged on an enterprise to understand complexity, and that's the difficult problem. Purpose is one of the manifestations of complexity. Purpose comes from brains. Brains come late in the universe. Brains and purpose and all the other things like love are things that require explanation, and we are working on explaining them. That's not arrogant, that's hard work, that's diligence, that's going for
Time
it.
out, I'm sorry.
Calling criticism bigotry is a dodge. If a belief makes claims about the universe, morality, death, heaven, hell, and human purpose, then it can be questioned. That is not hate. That is basic thinking. We have searched the stars, atoms, fossils, genes, and human history. We find patterns, laws, evolution, chemistry, and brains. We do not find a divine signature stamped into reality. And the line, "I desire another world, so I must be made for one," is weak. Humans desire wealth, power, perfect health, and lost loved ones coming back. Desire does not prove reality. Purpose does not need Christianity. Purpose comes from conscious minds, relationships, work, love, and responsibility. Religion wants to claim ownership over meaning, but meaning does not belong to the church. It belongs to the people living it.
My title, Queerer Than We Can Suppose, The Strangeness of Science. Queerer than we can suppose comes from J.B.S. Haldane, the famous biologist, who said, "Now my own suspicion is that the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. I suspect that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of or can be dreamed of in any philosophy." Richard Feynman compared the accuracy of quantum theories, experimental predictions, to specifying the width of North America to within one hair's breadth of accuracy. This means that quantum theory has got to be, in some sense, true. Yet the assumptions that quantum theory needs to make in order to deliver those predictions are so mysterious that even Feynman himself was moved to remark, "If you think you understand quantum theory, you don't understand quantum theory." It's so queer that physicists resort to one or another paradoxical interpretation of it. David Deutsch, who's talking here, in The Fabric of Reality, embraces the many worlds interpretation of quantum theory, because the worst that you can say about it is that it's preposterously wasteful. It postulates a vast and rapidly growing number of universes existing in parallel, mutually undetectable, except through the narrow porthole of quantum mechanical experiments. And that's Richard Feynman. The biologist Lewis Wolpert believes that the queerness of modern physics is just an extreme example. Science, as opposed to technology, does violence to common sense. Every time you drink a glass of water, he points out, the odds are that you will imbibe at least one molecule that passed through the bladder of Oliver Cromwell. It's just elementary probability theory. The number of molecules per glassful is hugely greater than the number of glassfuls or bladders full in the world. And of course, there's nothing special about Cromwell or bladders. You have just breathed in a nitrogen atom that passed through the right lung of the third iguanodon to the left of the tall cycad tree. Queerer than we can suppose. What is it that makes us capable of supposing anything? And does this tell us anything about what we can suppose? Are there things about the universe that will be forever beyond our grasp, but not beyond the grasp of some superior intelligence? Are there things about the universe that are in principle ungraspable by any mind, however superior? The history of science has been one long series of violent brainstorms as successive generations have come to terms with increasing levels of queerness in the universe. We're now so used to the idea that the Earth spins rather than that the sun moves across the sky, it's hard for us to realize what a shattering mental revolution that must have been. After all, it seems obvious that the Earth is large and motionless, the sun small and mobile, but it's worth recalling Wittgenstein's remark on the subject. Tell me, he asked a friend, why do people always say it was natural for man to assume that the sun went round the Earth rather than that the Earth was rotating? His friend replied, well, obviously, because it just looks as though the sun is going round the Earth. And Wittgenstein replied, well, what would it have looked like if it had looked as though the Earth was rotating? Science has taught us, against all intuition, that apparently solid things like crystals and rocks are really almost entirely composed of empty space. And the familiar illustration is the nucleus of an atom is a fly in the middle of a sports stadium, and the next atom is in the next sports stadium. So it would seem the hardest, solidest, densest rock is really almost entirely empty space, broken only by tiny particles so widely spaced they shouldn't count. Why then do rocks look and feel solid and hard and impenetrable? As an evolutionary biologist, I'd say this: our brains have evolved to help us survive within the orders of magnitude of size and speed which our bodies operate at. We never evolved to navigate in the world of atoms. If we had, our brains probably would perceive rocks as full of empty space. Rocks feel hard and impenetrable to our hands precisely because objects like rocks and hands cannot penetrate each other. It's therefore useful for our brains to construct notions like solidity and impenetrability, because such notions help us to navigate our bodies through the middle-sized world in which we have to navigate. Moving to the other end of the scale, our ancestors never had to navigate through the cosmos at speeds close to the speed of light. If they had, our brains would be much better at understanding Einstein. I want to give the name middle world to the medium-scaled environment in which we've evolved the ability to take action. Nothing to do with Middle Earth, middle world. We are evolved denizens of middle world, and that limits what we are capable of imagining. We find it intuitively easy to grasp ideas like when a rabbit moves at the sort of medium velocity at which rabbits and other middle world objects move and hits another middle world object like a rock, it knocks itself out. May I introduce Major General Albert Stubblebine III, commander of military intelligence in 1983. he stared at his wall in Arlington, Virginia, and decided to do it. As frightening as the prospect was, he was going into the next office. He stood up and moved out from behind his desk. What is the atom mostly made of, he thought. Space. He started walking. What am I mostly made of? Atoms. He quickened his pace almost to a jog now. What is the wall mostly made of? Atoms. All I have to do is merge the spaces. Then General Stubblebine banged his nose hard on the wall of his office. Stubblebine, who commanded 16,000 soldiers, was confounded by his continual failure to walk through the wall. He has no doubt that this ability will one day be a common tool in the military arsenal. Who would screw around with an army that could do that? That's from an article in Playboy, which I was reading the other day. I've every reason to think it's true. I was reading Playboy because I myself had an article in it. Unaided human intuition, schooled in middle world, finds it hard to believe Galileo when he tells us a heavy object and a light object, air friction aside, would hit the ground at the same instant. And that's because in middle world, air friction is always there. If we'd evolved in a vacuum, we would expect them to hit the ground simultaneously. If we were bacteria, constantly buffeted by thermal movements of molecules, it would be different. But we middle worlders are too big to notice Brownian motion. In the same way, our lives are dominated by gravity, but are almost oblivious to the force of surface tension. A small insect would reverse these priorities. Steve Grand, he's the one on the left, Douglas Adams is on the right. Steve Grand, in his book Creation, Life and How to Make It, is positively scathing about our preoccupation with matter itself. We have this tendency to think that only solid, material things are really things at all. Waves of electromagnetic fluctuation in a vacuum seem unreal. Victorians thought the waves had to be waves in some material medium, the ether. But we find real matter comforting only because we've evolved to survive in middle world, where matter is a useful fiction. A whirlpool, for Steve Grand, is a thing with just as much reality as a rock.
Human intuition is unreliable. The world feels solid, but atoms are mostly empty space. The sun looks like it moves around Earth, but Earth is rotating. Common sense has been wrong again and again. So when religion says the universe feels designed, that feeling is not evidence. It is another human shortcut. Our brains evolved to survive in the middle-sized world of food, danger, family, and movement. They did not evolve to naturally understand atoms, quantum physics, deep time, or the origin of the universe. That is why Christianity leans so hard on intuition. It sounds simple. It feels comforting. But science has shown that reality does not care what feels obvious. Feeling purpose does not prove God. Feeling design does not prove a designer. It only proves the human brain is limited.
When we talk about the doctrine of creation, most people automatically think exclusively of the creation-evolution debate. And I hope that our study of the doctrine of creation in this class has helped you to see how much richer and fuller the doctrine of creation is than just the controversy between creation and evolution. We've talked about things like creatio ex nihilo. We've talked about God's conservation of the world in being. We've talked about God's providence, both his ordinary providence in governing the world, as well as his acts of extraordinary providence and miraculous intervention in the world. And we've talked about higher orders of creation, like angels and demons. So the doctrine of creation is a rich theological doctrine that goes far beyond disputes between creation and evolution. Still, the question of how God created life and biological diversity on this planet is an important and very interesting aspect of the doctrine of creation. And so today what I want to do is to take an excursus from our survey of the doctrine of creation to talk specifically about the creation of life and biological diversity. In order to do so, we want to turn to the principal text in the Bible that addresses the question of God's creation of life and biological diversity, which is the first chapter of Genesis. After verse 1, in which God created the heavens and the earth, the universe, the author of Genesis goes on to describe how God creates this wonderful world as an environment for human beings to live in, how he transforms the earth into a habitable place for humanity. And so what we want to take up first in our study is the interpretation of Genesis 2, chapter 1, verses 2 to the end of the chapter, particularly in conversation with what modern science and the biological theory of evolution has to say about the origins of biological complexity. So let's begin our study by reading this text from the first chapter of Genesis. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and separated the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind upon the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the firmament of the heavens." So God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply upon the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the cattle according to their kinds, and everything that creeps upon the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a sixth day. Now, in order to interpret this passage correctly, we have to follow certain fundamental hermeneutical principles. Hermeneutics is the science of interpretation. And in interpreting a writing, you have to apply or follow certain hermeneutical principles in order to understand it correctly. First and most fundamentally, we must interpret a writing according to the literary genre or type to which it belongs. Genre is how you spell genre. The literary type to which a text belongs. It is absolutely critical to interpret texts according to their genre, because it would be a catastrophic mistake to interpret a text literally if the genre of that text isn't of the sort that is intended to be taken literally. For example, when the psalmist says, "Let the trees of the wood clap their hands before the Lord," he's obviously not trying to teach botany. Think how inappropriate it would be to read poetry, such as the Psalms, literally. That would be a disastrous misinterpretation of the text. Or again, think how inappropriate it would be to interpret literally a book like the book of Revelation, where the monsters and other figures that are described in Revelation are meant to be symbols of, say, nation states or political alliances.
Here is the problem with the creation story. The moment science challenges it, believers suddenly say, "You have to interpret the genre." That is convenient. When Genesis helps their argument, they treat it like truth. When it clashes with science, they call it poetry, symbol, or theology. Genesis says plants appear before the sun. It speaks of a firmament, separating waters above from waters below. It presents life in ordered creation days. Modern science does not support that sequence. Biology points to evolution over billions of years, not instant creation by command. So Christianity keeps moving the goalpost. Literal when useful, symbolic when exposed. That is not evidence. That is damage control. After hearing both sides, what do you think? Did Craig prove that Christianity is true, or did Dawkins make the stronger case that religion is filling gaps with comfort instead of evidence? Comment your thoughts below, and do not forget to like and subscribe.